Good afternoon. I'm Jeremy Shulman from the law firm Shulman Rogers, and with me is my colleague from the law firm Kaushik Bhattacharya. For the past 5 years, we have served as legal counsel to the federal government of Somalia on a range of important matters. A key focus of our work has been the identification, tracing, safeguarding, and recovery of Somali state assets frozen in various jurisdictions around the world. Since 2013, our work has been conducted under the supervision of the President of Somalia, His Excellency Hassan Sheikh Mohamud. We are aware that within the past few weeks, the United Nations Monitoring Group for Somalia and Eritrea, led by Jarat Chopra, released a letter criticizing our asset recovery work on behalf of the Somali government. Chopra personally signed the letter and thereby took personal responsibility for its contents. Let me say at the outset, and work to place them under the direct control of respect, cooperation, and participation of the United States government. It is important to remember that Somalia is a sovereign state with a legitimate, internationally recognized government. The government is led capably by President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud. It is completely lawful and appropriate for the legitimate, recognized central government of Somalia to recover Somali state assets and use those assets for the state-building activities that are underway throughout Somalia. No one needs to check with Jarat Chopra or anyone else at the monitoring group for permission to restore Somali state assets to the Somali government. Now, our first contract for asset recovery was signed in 2009 and then revised in 2010. This contract was released publicly and was the subject of a 2010 Wall Street Journal article. The contract provided for fair compensation for our services in line with our usual billing rates, but with one important difference. We would only be paid if we were successful in finding and recovering Somalia's assets. Our contract was revised a second time in the summer of 2013 as a result of a renegotiation requested by the Somali government. While we were doing our work, there was no fully functioning central bank in Somalia to oversee us. For certain periods of time, there was no governor in place, and until very recently, there was no board of directors. So it was determined that the most prudent and legally proper mechanism was for us to work under the direction of the President of Somalia, who was the most permanent and responsible of all government officials. In January 2013, it was publicly announced by then Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton that the United States government officially recognized the Somali government led by President Hassan Sheikh. With the ascendance of President Hassan Sheikh, but still no complete management structure for the central bank in place, we considered it optimal to continue working under presidential direction and authority, as did the United States government, whose cooperation and participation was sought to enable the release of the assets. In July 2013, as our asset recovery work advanced, the monitoring group, led by Chopra, released a report claiming that the Central Bank of Somalia was a slush fund for corruption, and that all financial officials of the Somali government were either themselves corrupt or incompetent to control corruption. These claims, although later disproved by a world-class investigative team, lent even more support for the idea that the Somali president should oversee the asset recovery process. The president was one of the only key officials in the Somali government who was not accused by Chopra in his July 2013 report. In the fall of 2013, we succeeded in unblocking tens of millions of dollars in Somali state assets, and we thereafter worked diligently under the direction of President Mohamud and his office to ensure that those assets were placed in proper central bank accounts. Chopra now comes forward with a salacious and sensational report with the clear intention of attempting to discredit the Somali government, our law firm, and the individuals who have worked hard to support the asset recovery project for the benefit of the people of Somalia. In his report, Chopra takes our emails and our memoranda, much of our work product, which led to the successful recovery of assets, and he completely mischaracterizes them. He mislabels the asset recovery work as corrupt, a conspiracy, and an effort to divert or misappropriate Somali assets. Let me be very clear. These labels are completely false, malicious, and utterly without merit. Chopra offers no evidence whatsoever to substantiate these false claims. And significantly, the facts that he does bring to bear actually prove the opposite of what he's claiming. Instead of misappropriating assets, the records show a careful attempt by all involved to safeguard the assets and place them under the control of the central bank and the Somali president. Let me address some specific assertions by Chopra. Chopra falsely claims that our work was conducted in secrecy. The reality is that we worked openly with the governments of the United States, numerous other governments around the world, as well as with the financial institutions holding Somalia's assets. We involved the World Bank as well, and we regularly consulted with key officials within the Somali government. Second, Chopra falsely claims that assets were diverted away from the central bank, which he says created opportunities for misappropriation. The reality is that all the assets have been fully accounted for. Under the President's direct instructions, and as required by our engagement agreement, we transferred $9 million to the Central Bank of Somalia's bank account in Turkey. That was done in early December of last year. The remaining $22 million in assets that we recovered were kept in the Central Bank of Somalia's accounts in the United States. That totals approximately $31 million in assets that have been repatriated to the Somali government under the authority of lawfully authorized officials in accounts known by the international community. Third, Chopra falsely claims that we exploited the authority of the president and leveraged support from the United States government to recover assets in Europe. The reality is that we obtained lawful authority from the president and other appropriate officials in the Somali government so that we could accomplish our task, which was to recover Somalia's state assets. We did this faithfully, successfully, and to the substantial benefit of the Somali government. Fourth, Chopra falsely claims that Somalia's 2013 report responding to the monitoring group's 2013 report was predetermined and was intended to cover up corruption at the central bank that Chopra claims to have uncovered in 2013. The reality is that our work responding to the monitoring group's 2013 report was conducted in accordance with the highest investigative standards, relying upon a team of world-class investigators at both Shulman Rogers and FTI Consulting. This was in stark contrast to the shoddy investigation conducted by the monitoring group itself in 2013. Our report was the exact opposite of a cover-up. We sought to shine a bright light on the true facts and the actual evidence. We gathered thousands of pages of accounting records, interviewed scores of witnesses in Mogadishu, Kenya, and other parts of the world, and with the help of accomplished forensic accountants, fully traced the assets that the monitoring group said they could not trace. We presented the facts as we learned them for the world to review and scrutinize. We hired leading media consultants who issued a press release that was disseminated far and wide. We conducted a news conference in Mogadishu, explaining our report and inviting broad review and discussion. To this day, the monitoring group has not identified any substantive part of our report, not even a single word, phrase, or idea in the entire document that is incorrect or otherwise misplaced. Given that all of the purported findings in Chopra's recent 2014 report, the question must be asked: what is motivating Chopra to make frivolous claims of corruption against the Somali government and against those assisting the government? Why is he doing this? And who is he working for? Last year, the monitoring group filed, as I mentioned, an utterly baseless financial report, falsely claiming that they had evidence of corruption at the central bank. We were counsel to the government at that time, and the government asked that we investigate the monitoring group's claims and respond to them. In the course of our investigation, we readily concluded that the monitoring group's claims of corruption were totally false, and that we were able to trace the funds that the monitoring group said were missing. We were surprised to find, in the course of our work, that the monitoring group had little training and experience investigating complex financial and accounting issues, failed to adhere to basic investigative standards, even those promulgated by the United Nations itself, and seemed to be driven more by a political agenda than a search for the truth. We drafted for the government a sharp rebuttal report, bringing to light the real evidence, which showed appropriate accounting at the central bank, and cataloged in detail the monitoring group's investigative failures, which were massive. Subsequent to the issuance of our report, the Somali government formally requested of the United Nations that severe actions be taken against the monitoring group, including removing Chopra himself as the coordinator of the group. And after releasing our report, Chopra reportedly told others, quote, that he was coming after Shulman Rogers to exact revenge for our critical work. It has also been reported that he believes his job is to destroy people, quote unquote, which is apparently what he is trying to do with the character assassination that permeates his latest work. So that is one motivation behind what Chopra is doing now. He's trying to settle a personal score against us because of what we exposed about the monitoring group in our report last year. But there is a second, even more serious motivation. Chopra reveals this on the last page of his recent report, when he recommends that the UN Security Council take steps to block any further efforts by Somalia, a sovereign state, to recover its state assets. Now, putting aside that such a block cannot be legally accomplished and would be easily challenged in court, Chopra is revealing what really bothers him about our work. He does not want this work to continue, and he regrets that it has succeeded thus far. He wants the assets of Somalia to be under the control of the international community rather than the Somali government itself. He does not want the Somali president or the Somali government to empower themselves by reclaiming the government's assets and placing them to work directly to improve security, educate children, and help create stable government institutions. In Chopra's worldview, these projects, if they're to be done at all, must be done by the international community. And he believes Somalis themselves can't be trusted to do this work. Now, our asset recovery project is founded on a much different way of thinking. It rests on the principle that the Somali government is sovereign, and that by virtue of its legitimacy, it can make its own decisions, and it has the legal and moral right to recover its own funds and then use them for rebuilding Somalia. It is particularly critical that now, when the UN itself is warned of an imminent famine and the urgent need for assets to avert a human catastrophe, the Somali government be able to reclaim its own funds and put them to work to address the looming crisis. Unfortunately, Chopra has chosen to resort to character assassination and other unseemly tactics to achieve an unseemly political agenda. Embedded in his latest report is evidence suggesting that Chopra, or those working with him, have broken laws in an effort to gather evidence and have forged certain documents to fit Chopra's false narrative. And he relies on media leaks to try to damage good people's reputations. The president of Somalia is a good and honest man. So too are Abdiaziz Amalo and Musa Ganjab. Fawzia Adam is a faithful public servant with high integrity. All of them are now under attack by Chopra for working honestly and in good faith, trying to help the Somali government succeed. Chopra's reckless personal attacks and recriminations must stop immediately. Steps are being taken now to commence legal actions against him to obtain redress in court for his illegal conduct. These lawsuits will be pursued vigorously until justice is done. But we will not be discouraged by the shrill words of one individual. We look forward to continuing our work for the Somali government and its people, and we are grateful for the opportunity that we have had to help in the important rebuilding efforts that the government is leading. Before I take questions, and I'm happy to do so, I want to thank you all for your attention. I want to recognize some of the Somali media who are here. Haran Online, Somali TV, Somali Channel, Horn Cable. Yes.
Thank you. My question is Somali government is corruption. How we can trust Somali government and Shulman Rogers?
How you can trust the Somali government, Shulman Rogers? Well, I think you have to be driven by facts and by the evidence. We've laid out last year, through the course of the work we did investigating the monitoring group's allegations, the facts, the actual evidence. And I would encourage you and everyone else who cares about these issues to read these reports at a deep level. Not just the surface, not just the sound bites, but actually to read the evidence. And you could look at Chopra's report from last year, for example, deeply, look at ours deeply, and draw your own conclusions. I'm confident that if you were to do that, if anyone were to do that, they would see what the true facts are. We were able to trace the assets last year that he said were missing. This time around, when he's now trying to criticize or challenge what we're doing, again, look at the facts. Read his current report in full, page by page, word by word, and you'll see that it's based on nothing. So there's no evidence at all to back up these claims. And so you have to be very skeptical about someone who's making claims where you can't back them up by evidence. We've told you that $9 million has been transferred to the central bank's account in Turkey. You can go ask the central bank, they can confirm that. You can ask the World Bank and other people in the international community, they'll confirm that. Actually, a public report was recently issued by the Financial Management Board that includes people from the World Bank and the IMF and the African Development Bank. These are outside interests, independent of the Somali government. They've confirmed.
Who is he working for?
Chopra is the head of the monitoring group. We don't know for sure who he's working for. We can speculate. He clearly is serving a political agenda. He clearly has objectives that are not in line with the objectives of others who are working with the Somali government and trying to build the Somali government. He appears to be taking every opportunity to damage and disparage and tear down the Somali government and anyone else like ourselves who are working with them to achieve a better day for Somalia. Anybody else? Okay, I also want to recognize Tusmo Times, a newspaper, for being present here today.
I do have a question. One of the questions is that about the asset recovery. One of them, you say you transfer money about the 9 million to account in Turkey.
Correct.
And 22 million in a central, I think, banking and account in the United States.
Correct.
Where did you recover this money from?
Okay, that's a good question. So the 9 million was recovered really from two central locations in the United States. One, Citibank, where the prior government, prior to the Civil War, maintained accounts. Other banks, principally in New York, when the Siad Barre government fell, treated assets that were in various New York bank accounts as abandoned property, and they turned them over to the New York state government. And so some of the money that we recovered, we found at the New York state government. The remainder of the assets that we recovered were frozen at the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. That includes Somalia's gold reserve and some cash. It's important to recognize that it took a long time and a lot of hard work to locate some of those assets. Those accounts at New York State, for example, and at Citibank. It took years of effort tracing assets, contacting the institutions, demonstrating to the institutions that there was proper legal authority to recover the assets. This was an extremely involved process, and I would suspect that had we not been doing this work, a lot of those assets never would have been located, and it could be 20, 30 more years, and maybe they never would have been repatriated to Somalia. You have a follow-up? Is there a follow-up?
Yeah, my other part of that question is that for the central previous government, Mohammed Siad Barre's government,
Yes.
the central government at
Correct.
that time.
Correct.
And the reason that money was frozen is that since that government was collapsed, not individuals, not to be misused, that money.
Right.
Now Somalia, it's kind of federal system, there's a lot of fragments, regions that doesn't sometimes work together.
Right,
The money, it belongs to the large Somali population nationally.
right.
But do you know if the money went to all the regions in Somalia, the money that you already sent? Or is there a partnership from all the regions of Somalia to use, that money, all of them, so it can get all the Somali people?
That's an excellent question. Of course, there is a internationally recognized central federal government in place in Somalia, and there's representation in that government from among all of the regions. The money itself and the assets themselves right now are in accounts that are under the control of the central bank. To my knowledge, they have not been spent. The gold, for example, is sitting in New York, and it's sitting there. So to be a discussion and perhaps a negotiation within the federal government about how the assets will be used in a way that's acceptable to as many regions and people around Somalia.
You guys continually monitoring for the asset, or what are you guys doing right now?
Partly related to Chopra's allegations. I think pressure has been put on certain actors within the Somali government to attempt to renegotiate our contracts. So we're in a state right now where we're doing that. We've made clear to the relevant authorities in Somalia that we're open always to evaluating the contract and discussing changes that they may want to make. So we're in that process right now.
According to the monitoring group report, other than the fair compensation you mentioned here, and also the usual billing your law firm charge the Somali government, they mentioned 5 to 6% extra money that goes to your law firm, and intentionally they mentioned that money is the money that your law firm, Abdulaziz Amalo, Musa Ganjab, Fauziya Aden, plus His Excellency the Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, using it personally. What do you have to say about that?
Completely false.
5 to 6%, is that correct? Extra?
Yes. Well, I'll address first the second part of your question, which was, are people spending money personally or somehow misappropriating assets? It's completely false. It's malicious, and it actually amounts, I think, to defamation, and that'll be addressed in court. Our contract is available. It's been circulating publicly. I'm happy to give you a copy of it. You can look at it yourself. There are various provisions for compensation. It represents a renegotiation of prior contracts where we actually discounted our prior fees by 70%. The structure that we have in place consists of a bonus when we're successful, which we have been here, of 5%. And then it allows us to retain, and you may be familiar with the concept of a retainer that a lot of law firms use commonly in the United States. A retainer of 6% that allows us to set aside assets to cover the ongoing expenses of the project. So we would recover assets, we would deduct our fees and the bonus and our expenses, but then we would turn the rest of the money over to the Somali government, but we'd be allowed to retain some money on hand so that if a year or two or more goes by before the next tranche of money is recovered, we have some money there to cover our expenses, and we also have a monthly fee of $25,000 per month to cover our costs and the fees that we would normally be incurring. We normally would bill on an hourly basis, but the government wanted to do this other structure for its own reasons. So the 6% is not earmarked for individuals. It was never promised to any government officials or any other people. It was always a retainer for us to cover all kinds of expenses for people, vendors, travel, other things associated with the project.
Yeah, he has a question that he would like to ask you. Go ahead. Ask him.
Okay, thank you for the information. My name is Hamid Mashey, the former State Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Hi, Hamid. How are you?
Yes, thanks. My question is, you are a law firm and you have every right to make business. So that's given. But the Somali people also need accountability and also transparency, and also the respect of the fledgling and growing and emerging Somali institutions, such as when dealing with such problem with this magnitude, it's always good to involve also, the other institutions that also are concerned about the same thing, about the finance. What I'm implying is the Auditor General. I'm also have in my mind the central governor and also the committee, parliamentarian committee of finance,
Of course.
and Ministry of Finance. So my question is, don't you think dealing only with the president subverts those institutions and sidelines all the other institutions that also have a vested interest also in problems that you are solving? And also I will mention that in recovering money and assets from the international community is good. It's good for the Somali people. We accept that. And my second question is, how much money do you recover so far? And how much money do you expect to get from other countries? And which countries are they and where are they? Thank you very much.
Let me correct one. I appreciate everything you're saying and largely agree with everything you're saying. It's not accurate, though, to say we were dealing only with the president. We had to have authority for the work we were doing. We can't, a private person or law firm can't just go around asking banks for money and claiming to be representing somebody. You have to have authority. So we, for the reasons we explain, we're working under the president's authority. But we were also in contact regularly with finance ministry, with the central bank, officials of the central bank. There wasn't always a governor in place, with the attorney general of the country at one point, the foreign affairs minister, Fawzia Adam, various officials throughout the government at different times. Our door was always open. We went to many international meetings, and I was in Mogadishu 5 times, meeting with a number of Somali officials. I've met with many members of parliament in connection with this as well. So we were never taking the position that we'd only talk to or work with one official of the government. But it's also important to recognize that it's not our responsibility to manage, all of the different political and governmental communications that are needed to run a government. And ultimately, it's up to the Somali government to consult internally, to involve the parliament as is appropriate, to get the job done. But we sought to cast a wide net. We regularly met with a range of government officials, not only in the current government, but in the prior governments under President Sheikh Sharif. You asked, second question was, how much have we recovered? What's left to be recovered? We've recovered approximately $33 million worth of assets so far. We've identified additional assets. It's not always possible to even predict the exact amount, because we believe we've located assets in certain locations. We approach those institutions, and there's a process that could take many months, even years, to get them comfortable with the idea of opening their records, releasing the information about what are in the accounts, and then turning the money over. But we have a working understanding of at least another $50 to $75 million that can be recovered, mostly in Europe.
Where do you go down?
As I explained, the money is either
Central bank or to
all central bank controlled
the bucket of the Somali government?
central bank accounts in Turkey and in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York.
Control the central bank government.
The central bank governor.
The president or the who?
Who controls the central bank?
Yeah.
There's a legal structure in place, sir, where there's a board of directors now in place. So you could say they control. There's a governor in place. And various stakeholders, including the Ministry of Finance, engage with the central bank on a daily basis. Yes?
In that 2009, when you signed that contract with the Somali government,
Right.
were there an RFD request for proposal from other law firms, or it was only your law firm that the government signed with the contract?
I'm not aware of any RFP that went out.
Okay.
I think there have been other law firms who have been in contact with the Somali government over the years.
Okay.
I'm not aware of particular proposals or efforts that other firms may have made. We made a proposal. It was negotiated, renegotiated several times to arrive at where we are today.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
My question is that there was a civil war in Somalia and everything was destroyed. The money that was kept left in the United States more than 10 years. I know how sometimes they control the money. This money was kept in American banks for years. It belongs to the Somali public, population, including I and others who are here. Do you think in your firm might help someone else to steal that money? Since it has been saved in America and it went to Somalia now, and it has been a debate or argument or rumor how that money has been used. Do you think your firm help someone to steal that money?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We have to recognize that the Somali government, there is a central government in place. It's recognized internationally. They represent all of Somalia. They are in control of the funds. We helped them gain control of the funds. That's all we did. Anybody else?
The chairman of that central Somali bank did resign. She resigned.
Yes.
When she resigned, she talked to the media, or there was about why she did resign.
Right.
And there was a debate or why she was resigned. Some people, they say she said that she was resigned because Fawzia Adam asked her to bring money was supposed to transfer to your firm, or was fee or something like that. Is that true, or has never
That's
been?
absolutely
Do you know
not
why
true.
She did resign.
I have my.
You say there is an instructional bank, but the person who was in charge, she resigned, complaining about how that money has been handled. That bank.
She wasn't complaining about how the money was being handled. She did express questions to us about what we were doing, why the Somali government needed a law firm, how it was going to operate, that sort of thing. She never said that she thought money was being taken or stolen or misappropriated in any way. Why she resigned? There are a lot of theories out there. You have to ask her. I do have the understanding that she met with Chopra, Mr. Chopra from the United Nations Monitoring Group, within days of her appointment being announced, and she was in New York. I don't know what her discussions were with him and what efforts they were working on together. But she did come to Mogadishu finally after a number of weeks traveling the world. She came to Mogadishu, I believe was there for 3 or 4 days, and then decided to leave. So those are the facts that I understand.
I do have one more question. I don't know if someone asked. There is a troops in the whole, the majority of Somalia, from Beledweyne to Ismail. Those troops are under the United Nations. And everything, it seems to me, I would like, Somali government to be strong and to be a good government. But it seems to the majority of the people, UN controls what's happening in Somalia. And to the segments of what's everything that's happening in Somalia.
Right.
How I can distrust is say everything that the UN monitoring group say about this money was false, and how that they are the ones who's handling everything that's happening in Somalia, and how I can trust your firm that you are telling the truth.
Well, I ask you to look at the facts. You partially answered your own question, I think, when you said the UN is controlling a lot of Somalia. The UN does a lot of good things in Somalia, but there are people like Mr. Chopra who you might say have a vested interest in trying to continue that work, continue writing reports year after year after year, wanting assets to be under the control of the international community, of people like Chopra, rather than in the hands of the Somali government. You can trust us. You can trust but verify, as Ronald Reagan said. You can listen, but examine the facts for yourself. We can open our records and you can look, and we're confident what you'll find. Okay, thank you very much.